To the old lady who's finally going to make room for the next generation, my daughter-in-law said with a bright smile as she raised her champagne glass at my grandson's 10th birthday lunch, and for a moment, the entire private dining room fell silent. I smiled back. I even lifted my own glass. Anyone looking at our table would have thought it was a harmless joke, a playful family moment. But I noticed something strange. Nobody laughed. Not really. My son Daniel stared at the white tablecloth. My grandson Ethan suddenly became very interested in the frosting on his birthday cake. Even the waiter standing near the window seemed uncomfortable. That was the moment I realized the toast had not been spontaneous. It had been rehearsed, planned, intended. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 72 years old, a widow, a grandmother, and until that afternoon, I believed I still had a place in my family. The restaurant overlooked Lake Harrison, and sunlight danced across the water outside the tall windows. It should have been a beautiful day. I had spent nearly 3 hours getting ready that morning. I chose the navy blue dress my late husband Robert always liked. I carefully curled my silver hair. I wrapped Ethan's gift myself, tying the ribbon twice because I wanted it to look perfect. Birthdays mattered in our family. At least they used to. Ethan sat at the center of the long table, wearing a paper birthday crown. He looked happy, but something felt different. During lunch, Vanessa had barely spoken to me. Every conversation seemed to flow around me rather than include me. Small things, easy things to ignore. Yet together they created a feeling I could not explain, like being a guest at a party hosted inside my own life. After the toast, Vanessa took a sip of champagne and smiled at several relatives seated nearby. A few offered awkward smiles in return. Nobody asked what she meant. Nobody challenged her words. They simply moved on to the next topic as if nothing unusual had happened. I kept smiling too. Years of experience had taught me that some answers arrive only when you remain quiet long enough to hear them. Still, I could not stop thinking about the phrase she used. Make room for the next generation. The words lingered in my mind like a draft slipping beneath a locked door. Make room how? By moving? By stepping aside? By disappearing from decisions? By giving up something she wanted? As the lunch continued, I watched Vanessa carefully. She seemed unusually relaxed, confident, almost relieved, as though an important milestone had finally been reached. Then I noticed her glance toward Daniel. It lasted only a second, but he immediately nodded. A tiny signal, a private understanding. And suddenly, despite the laughter, the birthday candles, and the cheerful decorations, I felt colder than I had all winter. Because deep down, I knew that toast was not the beginning of a joke. It was the first crack in a secret they believed I would never discover. I did not say much during the drive home. The late afternoon sun stretched across the highway, turning the pavement gold, but I barely noticed. Daniel had offered to follow me in his car in case I needed help getting home, which was unusual. For years, he had assumed I could manage perfectly well on my own. I thanked him and told him I was fine. He looked relieved when I declined. That alone stayed with me. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for several minutes without turning off the engine. My house stood exactly as it always had. The white shutters Robert painted himself 20 years ago. The maple tree we planted when Daniel graduated from college. The porch swing where I used to read on summer evenings. Everything looked familiar. Everything felt different. Eventually I went inside. The silence greeted me like an old friend. I placed my purse on the kitchen counter and set Ethan's thank you drawing beside the refrigerator. He had handed it to me before I left the restaurant. A simple sketch of a birthday cake and a stick figure labeled Grandma. Looking at it eased the tightness in my chest. Ethan was still a child. Whatever was happening, it was not coming from him. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window overlooking the backyard. The same backyard where Daniel learned to throw a baseball. The same backyard where Robert spent entire weekends. Tending roses. Memories lived everywhere in that house. Sometimes I could almost hear them. As evening settled in, I found myself replaying the lunch over and over. Not just Vanessa's toast. The details around it. The quick glances. The strange silences. The way several relatives seemed uncomfortable before she even stood up. It felt less like a family gathering and more like a meeting where everyone already knew the agenda except me. Around 7 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa appeared on the screen. Thank you for coming today. Ethan loved seeing you. A perfectly normal message. Yet I stared at it for a long time before responding. There was something polished about it. Something careful. as though she wanted a written record of kindness after publicly embarrassing me. I replied with a simple message and set the phone down. 30 minutes later, another notification appeared. This time it was from a neighborhood friend. Attached was a photograph from the restaurant. The entire family smiling around Ethan's cake. I enlarged the image. Everyone looked cheerful. Then I noticed something near the far end of the table. A dark blue folder resting beside Vanessa's purse. I had seen that folder before. 3 months earlier, while visiting Daniel's house, I had walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and found Vanessa quickly sliding the same folder into a drawer. At the time I thought nothing of it. Now I was not so sure. A strange feeling settled over me. Not fear. Not anger. Something colder. The feeling that pieces of a puzzle were beginning to move into place. I did not know what the picture looked like yet, but for the first time, I was certain there was a picture. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was still dark, and the coffee maker seemed louder than normal in the quiet kitchen. I carried my mug to the sunroom and sat in Robert's favorite chair. For years, I had started my mornings there, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. Normally, the routine brought comfort. That morning, it brought questions. I kept thinking about the blue folder. The memory would not leave me alone. Around 9 o'clock, I decided to stop relying on memories and start paying attention to facts. I opened a drawer in my desk and pulled out an old notebook where I occasionally wrote reminders, appointments, and family events. As I flipped through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. Small moments that had seemed insignificant at the time suddenly felt connected. 6 months earlier, Vanessa had asked unusually detailed questions about the house. Not the decorating or maintenance. The ownership history. The taxes. Whether I had updated my will. At the time I assumed she was making conversation. 3 months later, Daniel casually asked whether I had ever considered moving somewhere smaller. Then came brochures that appeared in my mailbox from retirement communities located 30 or 40 miles away. I remembered laughing when I first saw them. Now the memory felt different. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Grace Morgan, my closest friend for more than 30 years. Grace had attended the birthday lunch and was one of the few people who never hid what she thought. After a few minutes of ordinary conversation, she became unusually quiet. That alone caught my attention. Grace was not a quiet person. Finally, she sighed. "Eleanor, there is something I have been debating whether to tell you." My stomach tightened. I asked her what was wrong. She hesitated again before speaking. 2 weeks ago, I was meeting a client at the Lakeside Cafe. While I was leaving, I saw Vanessa sitting with 2 people. One was Daniel. The other was a woman I recognized from a local senior living company. For a moment, I simply stared out the window. The maple tree in the backyard swayed gently in the breeze. Everything outside looked calm. Inside, something shifted. Grace continued carefully. "I did not think much of it at first. People have all kinds of meetings. But after what happened at the birthday lunch, I started wondering if it mattered." I thanked her for telling me. We spoke for another few minutes before ending the call. Afterward, I sat motionless at the kitchen table. I was not angry. Not yet. What I felt was clarity. The fog was beginning to lift. The comments. The brochures. The blue folder. The strange toast. The meeting. One by one, the pieces were finding each other. Then I remembered something else. During the lunch, when Vanessa thought nobody was watching, she had rested her hand on that blue folder beside her purse. Not protectively, confidently, like someone guarding a plan that was already working. For the first time, I began to suspect that Ethan's birthday celebration had not simply been a family gathering. It may have been the moment they expected me to quietly accept a future they had already chosen for me. That afternoon, I drove to the public library instead of going straight home. I needed somewhere quiet to think. The library had always been one of my favorite places. Robert used to joke that if he ever lost me, he should check the history section first. I smiled at the memory as I settled into a chair near a tall window overlooking the town square. For nearly an hour, I did nothing except sit there and let my thoughts settle. The more I replayed recent months, the more details resurfaced. Last spring, Vanessa had insisted on helping me organize my financial records. She framed it as concern. She said she wanted to make things easier for me in case of an emergency. At the time, I appreciated the gesture. Now I remembered how interested she seemed in account numbers, property documents, and insurance paperwork. Then there was the afternoon Daniel unexpectedly offered to handle several household repairs. My son had never been particularly interested in maintenance projects, Yet suddenly he wanted access to every room, every storage cabinet, every file drawer. None of those moments had seemed suspicious alone. Together, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. When I returned home, I found an envelope tucked beneath my front door. There was no stamp and no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature, just one sentence. Before you agree to anything, ask to see the complete file. I read the note 3 times. The handwriting was unfamiliar. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank. But the timing felt impossible to ignore. Someone knew something. Someone wanted me to be careful. I placed the paper on the kitchen counter and stared at it while the evening light faded outside. Around 6 o'clock, my phone rang. Daniel. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. He asked how I was doing. He asked whether I had any plans for the weekend. Then, almost casually, he mentioned that he and Vanessa wanted to stop by next Tuesday to discuss a few future planning ideas. Future planning. Such harmless words. Yet they landed differently now. I told him Tuesday would be fine. After we ended the call, I walked through my house room by room. The framed photographs. The furniture Robert built with his own hands. The marks on the pantry wall showing Daniel's height at different ages. This house was not simply real estate. It was a record of an entire life. As darkness settled outside, I stopped in front of the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me looked calm. Older than she once was, certainly, but not fragile, not confused, not incapable of making her own decisions. For the first time since the birthday lunch, I felt something stronger than uncertainty. I felt resolve. Whatever was hidden inside that blue folder, whatever future they believed they had already arranged, I was finished being the last person to know about it. Tuesday arrived with clear skies and the kind of mild weather Robert always called deceptive because it made people underestimate what was coming. I spent the morning doing ordinary things. I watered the flowers near the porch. I folded laundry. I paid a few bills. Anyone watching would have assumed it was a normal day. In many ways, it was. Yet beneath every task ran a quiet current of anticipation. Shortly after 2 o'clock, Daniel and Vanessa pulled into the driveway. Through the front window, I watched them sit in the car for a moment before getting out. They appeared to be discussing something. Vanessa nodded twice. Daniel took a deep breath. Then they walked toward the house. I welcomed them inside and offered coffee. Vanessa declined. Daniel accepted. Small details often reveal more than grand speeches. Vanessa seemed eager to begin. Daniel seemed nervous. We sat around the dining room table that had belonged to my parents before it belonged to me. Sunlight streamed across the polished wood surface. For a few minutes they spoke about ordinary things. Ethan's school project, summer vacation plans, rising grocery prices. Finally, Vanessa placed a blue folder on the table. The same blue folder. Seeing it there felt strangely satisfying. At least now the mystery had a shape. She opened it carefully and slid several papers toward me. Her smile appeared practiced, concerned, patient, the smile of someone presenting a solution rather than a problem. She explained that they had been researching options that might make life easier for me in the future. Communities designed for active seniors, maintenance-free living, organized activities, transportation services. She spoke smoothly, as though reading from a script she knew by heart. Daniel occasionally added a comment about convenience or safety. I listened without interrupting. When they finished, I slowly turned the pages. Color photographs, floor plans, pricing information, testimonials. Everything looked professional. Then I noticed something. One page contained handwritten notes in the margin. Someone had circled specific unit numbers. Someone had written projected sale value beside a line referring to my current home. My eyes lingered on the figures. Vanessa immediately reached forward and turned the page. Too quickly, much too quickly. The room became very quiet. I asked a simple question. Had they already spoken with someone about moving me? Daniel looked toward Vanessa before answering. That single glance told me more than his words ever could. He admitted they had gathered information. Nothing more. Just information. Yet neither of them met my eyes. I nodded thoughtfully and closed the folder. Then I thanked them. The reaction was immediate. Surprise flickered across both faces. They had expected resistance. Questions. Perhaps even tears. Instead, I thanked them for bringing the material and told them I would review everything carefully. Relief washed over Vanessa's expression so quickly she could not hide it. For the first time, I understood something important. They believed they were ahead of me. They believed I was only now seeing the board while they had already planned the entire game. That misunderstanding would become their greatest mistake. After they left, I carried the memory of those handwritten notes with me. Someone had calculated the value of my future. Someone had already begun treating my life like a transaction. And somewhere beyond that blue folder, I was increasingly certain there was a larger plan waiting to be uncovered. The following morning, I did something I had not done in years. I called Michael Harper. Michael had been Robert's attorney for nearly 3 decades and had helped us navigate everything from property records to estate planning. After Robert passed away, I rarely needed legal advice, but I had always trusted him. When his receptionist answered, I expected to schedule an appointment for the following week. Instead, she told me Michael could see me that afternoon. By 3 o'clock, I was sitting across from him in a quiet office lined with bookshelves and framed certificates. He greeted me warmly, but his expression changed the moment I explained why I had come. I told him about the birthday lunch, the toast, the blue folder, the retirement community brochures, the handwritten notes. Most importantly, I told him about the strange feeling that decisions were being made around me rather than with me. Michael listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands and stared thoughtfully at the desk. Finally, he asked a question I did not expect. "Eleanor, has anyone recently asked detailed questions about your trust documents?" I immediately thought of Vanessa. Michael nodded slowly when I told him. Then he opened a file cabinet and retrieved a thick folder bearing my name. What he showed me next explained far more than I anticipated. Over the previous 8 months, several inquiries had been made regarding procedures for transferring ownership of residential property after voluntary relocation. None of the requests had been approved. None had resulted in action. Yet someone had clearly been gathering information. Michael would not reveal private details, but he confirmed enough to make one thing clear. The interest in my future housing arrangements was not casual curiosity. It had been researched carefully. My stomach tightened, but Michael's next words surprised me. "Legally, your position is extremely strong. Stronger than most people realize." He reminded me that every major decision regarding my property, finances, and residence remained entirely under my control. No one could force changes simply because they believed it would be convenient. Hearing those words felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. For days, I had been reacting to clues and suspicions. Now I finally had something solid beneath my feet. Before I left, Michael offered one final piece of advice. Do not confront anyone yet. If people believe they understand your position, they reveal very little. If they believe they are succeeding, they often reveal everything. During the drive home, I replayed that sentence several times. By the time I reached my driveway, I had made a decision. I would not argue. I would not accuse. I would not defend myself. Instead, I would do exactly what Vanessa already expected. I would appear agreeable, cooperative, grateful. Let them believe their plan was unfolding perfectly. Because for the first time since this began, I was no longer trying to understand the game. I was quietly learning how it was being played. Over the next several weeks, I became the version of myself they seemed most comfortable with. I smiled. I listened. I thanked Vanessa whenever she sent information about retirement communities. I even toured 2 of them. The transformation in her behavior was remarkable. The more cooperative I appeared, the more confident she became. Daniel seemed relieved as well. During phone calls, he spoke as though certain decisions had already been made. Not openly, not directly, but in small ways. He referred to my house as a property rather than a home. He talked about simplifying things. He mentioned future plans that always seemed to depend on me living somewhere else. I never argued. Instead, I asked questions. Lots of questions. The answers told me far more than the questions themselves. One Saturday afternoon, I joined them for lunch at their house. Ethan spent most of the visit showing me a science project involving a model solar system. His excitement reminded me why I was being careful. Whatever mistakes the adults were making, Ethan deserved better than conflict. While he searched for batteries in the garage, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Vanessa. She appeared unusually cheerful, almost triumphant. Then she said something she probably thought was harmless. She mentioned that some people wait too long to make practical decisions and end up creating unnecessary problems for their families. I smiled and agreed that planning ahead was important. The look of satisfaction on her face lasted only a second, but it was enough. She believed she was winning. A few days later, another piece of the puzzle arrived unexpectedly. Grace called again. One of her friends worked for a local real estate office and had recently attended a networking event. During a casual conversation, someone mentioned a couple who seemed very interested in estimating the future market value of a particular property. My property. Nothing illegal. Nothing improper. Just curiosity. Yet the timing was difficult to ignore. By now, the pattern was impossible to dismiss. The discussions about moving, the retirement communities, the financial questions, the property estimates. Each thread pointed in the same direction. Still, I remained patient. Michael's advice stayed with me. People reveal the most when they believe no one is paying attention. Then, on a quiet Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. He wanted to schedule a family meeting the following week. According to him, it was simply an opportunity for everyone to discuss long-term plans together. The wording sounded innocent enough. Yet as I stared at the screen, I felt the same certainty that had followed me since the birthday lunch. Something significant was approaching. Whatever they had been building toward was finally ready. I responded that I would be happy to attend. Then I set the phone down and looked around the living room. The photographs, the memories, the life Robert and I had built one careful year at a time. They still believed I was quietly accepting the future they had prepared for me. What they did not realize was that I had spent weeks preparing for a very different conversation. The family meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at Daniel and Vanessa's house. When I arrived, everything looked unusually formal. The dining room table had been cleared except for several folders, notepads, and a pitcher of iced tea. Vanessa greeted me warmly, almost too warmly. Daniel seemed tense. Ethan was spending the afternoon at a friend's house, which struck me as convenient. Whatever discussion they planned to have, they did not want a child present. I took my seat and waited. Vanessa began by thanking me for coming. She spoke about family, responsibility, and planning for the future. The words sounded thoughtful, but they felt rehearsed. Soon the conversation shifted toward practical matters. Housing, maintenance, long-term comfort. Then the blue folder appeared once again. This time there were additional documents. Charts, cost estimates, timelines. Vanessa carefully explained how much easier life could be in a managed community. Daniel nodded along, occasionally adding comments about convenience and reducing stress. I listened quietly. The more they talked, the more confident they became. It was as though my silence encouraged them. Finally, Vanessa slid a document across the table. She described it as a preliminary planning agreement. Nothing binding, nothing urgent, just a way to organize future decisions. I glanced at the pages without reacting. The language was polite, but the intention was clear. The plan assumed my eventual relocation. It assumed the sale of my house would become part of the process. Most interesting of all, it assumed that everyone involved already agreed. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel asked what I thought. I folded my hands and looked at both of them. I told them I appreciated the effort they had invested. Relief immediately softened their expressions. Vanessa smiled. Daniel leaned back in his chair. They believed the conversation was ending exactly as they had hoped. Then I opened my purse and removed a folder of my own. Not blue, dark green. I placed it gently on the table. The room grew noticeably quieter. Vanessa's smile faded. First, Daniel's followed a moment later. I explained that before making any decisions, I had consulted professionals and reviewed my affairs carefully. I spoke calmly, almost casually. No accusations, no anger, just facts. The confidence that had filled the room began to shift. For weeks they had assumed they were leading the discussion. Now, for the first time, they realized there was information they did not possess. As I opened the folder, I saw Vanessa glance toward Daniel. It was the same look they had exchanged at the birthday lunch. The same private signal. Only this time, uncertainty had replaced confidence. And for the first time since this began, I knew the next few minutes were not going to unfold according to their plan. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I opened the folder and slowly removed several documents. Then I slid copies across the table. Daniel looked confused. Vanessa looked concerned. I explained that over the previous few weeks, I had reviewed every aspect of my estate plan, property records, and long-term financial arrangements with professional guidance. Neither of them interrupted. They simply watched. Then I shared the first piece of information. My home was protected by a trust structure that could not be altered through assumptions, informal agreements, or future planning conversations. The second piece of information was even more important. Several months earlier, after noticing changes in family dynamics, I had quietly updated certain provisions regarding how my assets would eventually be distributed. Vanessa's expression tightened. Daniel looked down at the papers in front of him. I continued calmly. I told them that I had no intention of leaving my home. Not now. Not next year. Not because someone else believed it would be more convenient. This house was where I intended to remain for as long as I chose. Then I paused. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Finally, I addressed something neither of them expected. I told them that the issue was never really about real estate. It was about respect. Over the previous year, I had noticed conversations happening around me instead of with me. Decisions being discussed before anyone asked what I wanted. Assumptions replacing communication. Vanessa opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. Daniel stared at the table. I was not angry. In truth, that surprised even me. Somewhere along the way, the hurt had transformed into clarity. I no longer needed apologies to understand what had happened. I only needed the truth. Then I shared my final decision. A significant portion of my estate would eventually be placed into an educational trust dedicated exclusively to Ethan's future. College, training, opportunities, whatever path he chose when he became an adult. The remainder would be managed according to instructions that reflected values rather than expectations. Responsibility, kindness, integrity. The room remained completely still. Nobody argued. Nobody raised their voice. The outcome they expected had quietly disappeared. After several minutes, I gathered my documents and returned them to the folder. Before leaving, I stood and looked at both of them. Then I smiled. It was the same smile I wore at the birthday lunch. The difference was that now I understood everything. As I reached the front door, I turned back one final time. I thanked them. Not sarcastically, not bitterly, genuinely, because without realizing it, they had given me something valuable. They had shown me exactly where I stood. Later that evening, I sat on my porch watching the sun disappear behind the maple tree Robert and I planted so many years ago. The air was warm. The neighborhood was quiet. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan thanking me for helping with his science project. I smiled and placed the phone beside me. The future was still unwritten. The house was still home. And for the first time in a very long while, the next chapter of my life belonged entirely to me.